Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Masterclass, episode 8.
We're back.
Joshua, my friend, how are you?
I'm good. I'm in my shop. I'm in my happy place.
You've been busy. You've been
I
busy
have.
in the shop.
I have. I've been doing so many fun things in the shop. It's been great.
It's I know. Did you drop that video today or was it yesterday?
Which one?
On the pea shooter.
The pea shooter. That was yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah.
I saw it. I saw it this morning when I was logging in to make sure I scheduled this show tonight. It's like,
yeah,
I'm
the
pretty
pea
sure-
shooter's been getting some love, little bits here and there because that's really what I've had time for. And you know, you can have 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there, and get a lot done on CAD designs, and then you throw it on the printer and walk away. And then you come back and realize, oh, I measured that wrong. Make a revision, throw it back on the printer, walk away. So a lot of that. There's just been a lot of really fun details going on. The pea shooter, having a lot of fun dolling that airplane up and getting it ready for SEF in late April. It's going to be a really fun event.
Yeah, she's looking real nice.
I have a whole box full of Dubro hardware to throw on that thing yet, so stay tuned for that for sure. It's going to be a big challenge. Get all of that on the plane.
I like it. If you guys are just tuning in, drop in the chat where you guys are tuning in from. I know I've seen. What do we got? South Dakota, West Virginia, Missouri, Daytona Beach or Daytona, Florida, Mesa, Arizona, Brooklyn, Ohio, Farmington, New Mexico, Saint Germain, France.
That's got to be the middle of the night for you. Go to bed. It'll be on YouTube in the morning.
Princeton, West Virginia, Sheboygan, Des Moines, Iowa. So we love seeing where everybody's tuning in from. I'm going to drop a link to Joshua's YouTube channel in the chat for you guys to go check out all the cool stuff he's been doing. We were just talking about all the cool stuff he's been putting up as of recently. So,
yeah.
But, yeah, I know we're going to talk some fiberglass and epoxy this evening.
Yeah, we are.
Fun stuff.
We are. Well, I wanted to have this episode mostly because I feel like pretty much every time I encounter someone who's never played with epoxy and fiberglass before, they think it's like this voodoo magic that they can't possibly wrap their minds around. If you've ever done paper mache, it's literally like that, only using different stuff. Really, it's quite that simple. You've got the glue or the flour and water, and you've got the liquid aspect, and then you've got the substrate aspect. So whether you're using tissue paper or newspaper or fiberglass cloth, it's the same idea. Same thing, like if you go to do paper mache and you apply some of that glue or flour water or whatever, you want to make sure it's nice and wet. Same thing with the fiberglass. Make sure it's nice and wet all the way through. You can see where it's wet and you can see where it's dry, and you just apply a little bit more or squish things around, rub it with your hand. It's really very, very approachable. It's just a little more messy. Requires a little bit more finesse. And sometimes it just needs a little bit of a guiding hand and perhaps a little sense of adventure on your side.
Yeah, I can see. I think the epoxy factor is what's most intimidating to a lot of guys, and it's not just in model aviation. I've seen it in other aspects too.
Yeah.
I got a big fiberglass epoxy project this summer I'm doing, so we'll see how that goes.
Well, good luck.
It'll be interesting.
Well, I mean, we can dig right in, but I did want to ask you one question before we get into this. Is that all right? All right.
Sure.
All right. Putting you on the spot here. So you're going to Toledo.
Yes.
Right?
Dubro will be at the Toledo show and the Dayton Model Rama show as well in April.
All right. So you've said previously that you're on the lookout for a model.
I am.
Right? You are. What model are you on the lookout for?
Ooh, more than likely it's going to be a Cub.
Okay.
Cub. Josh was disappointed in me. I know.
No, it's. I'm not disappointed. Cubs are really good planes. Make sure you're ready on that rudder, young man. No, the reason that I ask is this is a topic of conversation that I'd like to have in a future week. You have to go into these swap meets knowing what you want. You can't just go there and be surprised by something. Because more often than not, if you do that, I'm not saying that it doesn't happen or shouldn't happen. I'm saying that more often than not, it's not going to happen. A lot of the stuff at this is, frankly, it's junk. Every once in a while, you can find some real diamonds in the rough, and I certainly have. But you really need to go in with your eyes open and focused on what are you looking for. Have a plan. And then we can talk more about this later, but I thought I would initiate that conversation now and have people start thinking about it so that we can have some more interactive discussion with people in the future. Sound good?
Sure. Yeah, I like it.
Okay.
I like it.
All right.
I know there's already been quite a few swap meets already going on around the country.
Yes,
and I saw the guys at RC Roundtable. They were at some shows. I don't think it was last weekend. I think it was the weekend before. But
it seems like every other weekend they're going.
yeah.
But like there are boats there that I'm just like, oh, that would be really fun to sort of play with that. That'd be kind of cool. And that's kind of the surprise factor. But then like there is one model that I'm kind of on the lookout for.
What are you on the lookout for?
So it's a Fairchild PT-19.
Okay.
Guilty as charged. Why? It's not that particularly of an interesting airplane. It's a trainer. So the interesting part for me is the history. The history is that those airplanes were made literally half an hour away from me in Hagerstown, Maryland. Fairchild Aircraft Company was made in Maryland. And that's my interest, is the history. I want to explore the history more of the Fairchild PT-19. So yeah, I know that there's an old Great Plains one and that there's an old Hangar 9 one. They're both pretty big, like in the 89, 90 inch category, something like that. So that's really what I'm looking for, something in that area, because I want to do some really fun details. I want to explore this model and really get to know it rather intimately, and play with landing gear configurations and look at the engine configurations and detail the cockpit and stuff, like that kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. I want to explore this weird kind of goofy looking trainer. I've heard that the models all fly quite gentle, and that's fine with me. I'm not looking for anything too aerobatic. I really just want to have a lot of fun playing with details and learning the history.
RC Barn said he's got 3 tables at Toledo this year. There's always diamonds in the rough there.
Yeah.
Which we did see a few last year, I think.
We did. Yeah.
Dynamic RC says the Dynaflight PTs fly nice. He's had 5 now.
Why 5? Why not only 1?
Because down is up and up is expensive, right?
Yes. Just poking fun a little there, Dynamic RC. Appreciate your comments. No, I'll look into the Dynaflight, but really I'm looking to pick up something just because it's fun that way. But yeah, we'll see if anything turns out this year. I will be at the Lebanon RC Expo in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. I have a table there. I will be there with our friend Anthony from FPV Builds RC, who is sponsoring the event. He is a North America retailer on the East Coast for FR Sky radio equipment. So it'll be fun.
Suter family said when you're upside down, up is down.
Correct. Correct. All right, so shall we get started with fiberglassing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the first thing that we have to talk about are the ingredients of the equation. Okay, so when you fiberglass, you know the answer to this, Brian, but you typically use something called an epoxy. 2 trees and 3 dumb thumbs. Trees happen, and boy, my thumbs are getting dumber the older I get, I tell you. All right, so we had a conversation briefly, if you recall, last season about epoxy. This is Zap epoxy. This is their Z-epoxy. This is their finishing resin. And the reason that it's finishing resin is because you can see that it's quite thin in viscosity. It flows very, very well. The 30-minute cure epoxy, while it has a really long working time, it is quite thick. And the reason that you don't necessarily want that is because it's not going to work its way into the weave of the fiberglass. Now, there are tips and tricks that you can do to thin it. You can add denatured alcohol to thin it out. But one of the big things is to try to find a dry time to do it. Thankfully, the air is very dry in the winter here, relatively speaking, where I live. I have had situations where fiberglass and epoxy has flashed, and that's it's a phenomenon where there's so much moisture in the air that it in fact separates the resin
And the hardener.
and the hardener, and it stays sticky. It never cures. So that is a factor. Make sure that you know ahead of time that it's going to be dry, or that you're going to do this in your home where you know that you can regulate the humidity. The other thing is definitely stay away in this hobby from polyester resins. So, for example, if you run down to your local hardware store, your Ace, your Baynard's, or Menards, Home Depot, Lowe's, generally what you're going to find is something that's like what would be used for like boats or working with cars, and those are typically polyester resins as opposed to true epoxy resins. The reason you don't necessarily want those is because they induce more of an exothermic reaction when they are mixed with their hardener. So the chemical reaction itself generates heat, and so the resin expands, and then as it cools, it shrinks. And so you end up having warps and little things in these kinds of applications that you end up having to do more work and sand out. Not necessarily a bad thing in some situations, but more often not, it becomes problematic. And in addition, they're far more stinky as a result. Mm-hmm. So be aware of that, especially if you're using it in an enclosed space, like a small garage or a room. You really don't want to be messing around with this stuff and breathing all of those fumes. Whereas opposed to epoxy resins, like stuff from Zap, it's really not that bad. It's not a big deal. I'll tell you, using epoxy in the basement here in my home, where the furnace is literally 20 feet from me, the smell does not go anywhere outside of this basement. So there is that. The other thing that you're going to want, the other ingredient aside from your epoxy, is your cloth. Cloth comes in a number of different flavors, shall we say. I'm going to hold this up pretty close. Hopefully you can see this and that the camera will focus. There you go.
There you go.
So we have a nice weave on this fabric. It's very small. But typically when you go and buy fiberglass cloth, you buy it in what's called weight. So you have something that's like 6 ounces per square foot or square yard. And so that's the weight. Now you can have a heavy weight cloth, but this is like stuff that you would get at the hardware store, right? For fixing a car. Look at the size of the weave compared to this other stuff. So really what you're looking, it's a much finer weave, and these are honestly about the same in terms of weight. All right. The difference is this stuff, because of the finer weave, it goes around corners much better, like tight corners. You can bend it around corners. Whereas the large stuff, this stuff, it does not want to bend hardly at all, unless you do it on a bias. Brian, you know what bias is, right? I'm assuming.
No.
Okay, so bias. You have strands running horizontal and strands running vertical, all right? It's creating a lattice. So when you go to layer, typically you want to do something at a bias. So you have the horizontal and the vertical, and you put it to a 45-degree angle. Okay?
Got it.
So if you can really do some good bending on the bias, but it's not going to want to bend not on the bias, right? So with the finer strands, you get much better cornering and more precise shapes. And then the lighter weight, not only does it help fill the weave of the thicker fabric underneath, in between, but it also is able to conform to compound curves and take those corners exceptionally well. So that is why we have the super lightweight stuff. This is from our friends at Deluxe Materials in the UK. They've sent us a whole bunch of stuff, and this is their fine material, and I'll try to again zoom in. It's in the plastic, but you should be able to see. Get my face out of here. Come on. There we go. So you can see that this this weave, you can see pretty well defined, but it's very hard to see it through the camera on the fine weave stuff because it is tiny on the lightweight stuff. And that is what's going to give you your best surface finish. So usually surface finish is done after you've done all of your heavy glass work and any of your surface imperfections. This is Model Light from our friends at Deluxe Products. It's a very lightweight filler that you can spread and kind of smooth, and then you sand it back. The other thing that you can do is, again, using the power of epoxy, you can mix in epoxy with micro balloons. And these are tiny glass spheres. Don't want to breathe them too heavily. But you mix that up and it almost makes like a toothpaste consistency. All right. And then you can spatula that into big gaping holes or other imperfections, or even if you want to create a small fillet around like an empennage or a wing fillet, anywhere you want to try to smooth out, it's a really great tool for doing that because it makes it very, very hard, but also the micro balloons help make it very, very sandable. So you put in excess and you sand it back. And we're actually going to talk a little bit more about that tonight because of the demonstration that I've got going. Questions so far?
So Suitor family is asking, what is the working time of the finishing resin epoxy you'll be using?
Very good question. Very good question. So the finishing resin from Zap, and this will vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, so don't be a man and not read the instructions. Read the instructions, okay? The finishing resin from Zap has a working time, a pot time, sometimes referred to, of about an hour. Okay, kind of depends on the temperature. Right now it's freezing in my shop, so working time is a little bit longer. Full cure time on the box says about 3 hours. For me, today in the basement, 4.
Okay.
Just because it's so cold. So that is a factor as well. It can sometimes work to your advantage. In the summertime, it can work to your disadvantage, or to your advantage, depends on how you want. Also note that the longer working / cure time that you have, the more brittle the fiberglass will be. So like 5-minute epoxy, you can almost bend that epoxy if you create like a long roll of it or a bead of it.
Sure.
As opposed to this stuff, it's just going to snap, kind of like toffee. So keep that in mind too. What really helps bring things along is the fiberglass cloth itself. That is what brings the strength. Okay, the epoxy itself adds some strength, but really it's a binder for the fibers. Okay.
Got it. We got 2 more questions.
Awesome.
Flying Finn RC is tuning in from the UK. He's asking, is there an alternative to epoxy for covering, and asked if you've used Easy Coat.
Yes. Okay, so Easy Coat. Easy Coat. I have a bottle right here. Easy Coat. Have more of this stuff. The Deluxe sent more of this stuff because I need to go over this stuff that I'm going to show you tonight when I'm done. So Easy Coat is essentially a sanding sealer. I've looked at the safety data sheet mostly because I'm a scientist, and everything that I do revolves around being safe, whether it's pressure, chemicals, biologics, whatever. So it's essentially the same thing as sanding sealer or water-based polyurethane. It's a very specific concentration of it, and it works exceptionally well. You can also mix that with microballoons. What that does is, like, say you have your finish fiberglass, because of how thin Easy Coat is, you can do multiple layers of the Easy Coat and cure it out. It's really nice because it's water-based, right? You can accelerate the drying using the sun with UV as well as the heat. I use a hairdryer. I have a dedicated hairdryer in my shop. Don't use your wife's hairdryer. She will kill you. And then you can dry it and do multiple coats, like scratch it up in between coats, that kind of thing, and then sand it back. Or you can just do a thick coat of the Easy Coat mixed with microballoons, and that will help fill the weave too. Sand all of that back, and then do a final finish Easy Coat, and then apply paint. All right. So there are a number of different ways that you can do a finish. Note that the Easy Coat does not add all that much strength. It will be a fairly resilient surface for accepting paint, but in terms of adding strength to a wing, it will not. Epoxy and fiberglass will. So sometimes a model is designed to be built with the epoxy and fiberglass, like if you're doing an entire wing. If that's the case, do not use Easy Coat, because you're going to have a very sad day at one point. Promise. All right, next question.
Rick Rader asked, and I think this is a great question. For strength, is it better to use multiple layers of lightweight fiberglass or use one heavier weighted fiberglass?
It depends on your application. And what I mean by that is, so if you have one heavyweight fiberglass, when you go to sand that smooth, it's going to be a lot of work to get it smooth, and then you're going to be left with all these little divots all over it that you eventually have to fill with more epoxy. Which is why when you do a layup in a situation where you're going to do a final paint finish, you apply the heavyweight stuff for your strength, and however many layers of that per the strength that you're requesting, and then you do finish layer over top. Some people prefer to have an intermediate layer of cloth, and then it depends on like how heavy you're going for. So for example, discus launch gliders, they're using Kevlar and carbon fiber cloths, not necessarily fiberglass cloths because they are stronger, but they have thinner weave with all of this fiberglass, epoxy, because they want it as light as they possibly can. They're really threading the needle of balancing strength and lightness. Okay, mass matters on those airplanes. So if you really don't care about the mass all that much, I mean, just go with whatever your gut tells you, whatever's going to be easiest. But if you're really going for something that's going to be structural, you kind of have to be the one to do your own engineering. So ask around. So that's why I say it really depends on your application.
Got it. Caught up.
Okay, very good. So at this point, I am going to show you guys the wings. As you can tell, I've got a whole bunch of stuff laying around here because I've been working, right? Now, the first thing I'll show you guys is that I do have the covers done for the wheels, which is kind of exciting. That's a big milestone. These did not exist before. The 3D prints have just been an absolute joy to work with. Couldn't be happier. But where we are right now is we are trying to, if you recall, mend and integrate some additional reinforcements. I'm going to try to bring this closer to the camera. And then if you can see this little V shape in here just below my thumb, where there was no material all there, and that induced some cracking right here in this plastic piece. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reinforce this from the backside, as well as create a more scale line between here and here. In addition, there's this bump ridge over here that doesn't transition well between the plastic and the wing. So I'm trying to create a transition as well. Now, what I've done is I've taken some of our fiberglass and epoxy and scratched it up on the inside of the wing. A little hard to see now that the epoxy is in there with some micro balloons to help fill things up. But I scratched up with this 60 grit sandpaper. Just scratched everything up, removed paint, etc. That way I could wrap this fiberglass and epoxy around the corner. That way I create a wall here. Now with this wall, there's some gaps as well, and that's why I took the remaining epoxy that was in my little cup. I'm using these tiny little paper cups that I ordered off of Amazon. They're like little medicine cups. But since they're paper, you know, they're biodegradable, and I can throw them in the garbage and feel less guilty about throwing them away, as opposed to a plastic cup. But mix that up and then apply the glass cloth, but then I have leftover epoxy, and so I just added micro balloons to whatever was left, and then filled in this crease right here a little bit, as well as this part here, which I prepped by removing some of the plastic film covering, roughing things up again with the sandpaper, and then applying that here. And there's a little bit of a blob that we can sand off right there. Not a huge deal. All right. So first things first, this is raw from the layup. I set this on earlier this afternoon. Took me 10 minutes to do. It's on my lunch break. Not a huge deal. Okay. The first thing I'll tell you is have a glove ready. I've got a box of nitrile gloves that I like to keep around, just because it's messy, and you can see that I've got stuff on it, and you can clean up stuff. The epoxy will wipe up pretty easy with isopropyl alcohol. I always have a bottle ready on my bench with isopropyl alcohol whenever I am working with epoxy. From there, yeah, you can use a paper towel to blot or wipe whatever you need, but I prefer, since we're using some pretty harsh chemicals, my fingers are my best tool most of the time, and so that's why I always have a glove ready. Paper towels, I have a scrap paper towel here. In addition, I have a roll to the side in the event that I need something. So always have things ready to clean up your mess. And from here, we're going to make more of a mess. I have dedicated scissors for two things. I have dedicated scissors for cutting my fiberglass cloth. And I have these really nice Fiskars scissors that are very, very sharp. Their only job is to cut fiberglass cloth. I will not use them for anything else. If there is any sort of epoxy on the fiberglass, I use these scissors. These are my crap scissors. They're gross and falling apart and full of scuffs and acetone stains and all sorts of things, because this is what will happen to the nice scissors if you don't. So rather than try to trim this, with a rotary tool or anything, I'm going to trim the excess right at the top of the line. So I'll hold this close again. So you can see in this area, let me get the focus. Okay, mostly focused. Okay, good. So you can see there's a darkness, and that darkness is where things were wet. That's where I got the epoxy to. And you can see this is soft cloth still. Well, I want to cut this away. That way I'm not dealing with all these little threads flying around my shop, risking me breathing them in, risking them getting tangled up in things. And so I am just going to do a rough cut to get those out of my way.
So you had a quick question here.
Yeah, sure.
Can you use epoxy resin over polyester parts or vice versa?
You can. Do not trust the interface. Make sure that you're scuffing up whatever is cured out with good sandpaper. And even then, it'll stick to it, but it's best to stick with the original, whatever it is, whether it's epoxy or polyester. I have heard that aging becomes an issue. They age differently, and so you can have delamination at that interface. I have personally never experienced it because I always use epoxy. I never use polyester resin. Alright, so from here, I am going to take my rotary tool and plug it in. And I'm going to do a trim roughly where I need it. I am intentionally keeping this slow so that if I slip, I'm going to do minimal damage to the airplane. Alright. Quick work of that. So we can remove those pieces and throw them in the garbage. Next thing I need is... it's over here on the shelf. Hey Brian, can we give one of these away?
We absolutely can.
Okay, cool. Can I ask a question for everybody to answer?
Yes.
So you can give one of those away?
Yes.
Okay. What North American prototype was the originator of the AT6 Texan? Go. Question is, what North American, the aviation company, what North American prototype was the originator of the AT6 Texan? It's 2 letters hyphenated with 2 numbers.
We got NA16, BT13.
NA16 is correct. NA16, the NA16 prototype. So quick little history on this. The NA16 prototype was modified into the NA26, which was then the original submission to the United States Army Air Corps in 1937 as a contestant in the Basic Combat Aircraft Competition. All right, so there you go.
Ryan. Ryan, send us an email, orders@dubro.com with your shipping address, and we'll get you some quick hand sanders sent out tomorrow.
Nice. The next question is not as easy. I did my homework for this one.
So everybody have Google on cue for later in the show.
Seriously, it's a good one. It's a good one. All right, back to the plane. All right.
So quick question. Rick Rader says he's building a Dumas boat and wants to fiberglass the hull. Will fiberglassing waterproof the hull?
Yes, fiberglass will waterproof the hull.
Perfect.
All right.
Got it.
All right. So now that I've done rough trimming, I need to do some additional sanding to shape this and get things flush. I'm using the coarse paper on my quicksand hand sander. All right. So we've got some rough shaping here. We don't want to go all the way to where we need to go because at this point we need to rough up the surface. We need to rough up the surface because we're not done applying stuff just yet. When you go to apply the epoxy and the microballoons, you're going to have most of the way there. But the rest of the way there is going to be taken care of by spackle. So I'm trying to rough up the surface where I know I need to apply spackle. There's still, given that I put the glass cloth on the back side here, there's still a ridge between this portion of the wing and this portion of the cover. So I need to fill that. I need to fill that with some spackle, even though I did try to fill it with a little bit of the epoxy and microballoons. It kind of dripped out because it was a little bit runny. I'm going to rough up here, put a little extra there. So now what I'm going to use is auto body glazing and spot putty. This stuff dries pretty hard, sands pretty easy, and takes any further finish really, really well. And again, this is why I like to use a glove and why the finger is red already, because I already did the other side. We'll get there. So I just squeeze a little bit out onto my finger and smoosh it where I need it, knowing that I'm going to sand some of it back. I make sure that there's extra. But that's it. And then this is where you go away for several hours and just let it dry. Let it dry. Don't try to force this stuff to dry too quickly, because it won't. It's going to dry when it's going to dry. And I usually don't even think about it for at least 4 hours. All right, so this side has been drying for almost 9 hours, 9.5 hours at this point. All right, so it's ready to go. So what we can do now is take our hand sander and start knocking away some of the bulk that we have. And then even still, when we get there, we can realize, oh, well, that's nice and smooth already. We can start going with something else. I don't need to be quite as aggressive. And that's where one of these comes into play. I highly recommend one of these, mouse sander of some kind. They make corded ones as well as this cordless version. I have the cordless version only because I had the batteries already for my lawn equipment. So yeah, I'm using 120 grit paper, and I am gonna just start taking back some of this red stuff. It will move from being red to pink when you sand it. So now that I've done more knocking away the vast majority of the bad stuff, I move in to use a sponge. You can pick up these at Walmart or any other sanding store. So it's a sponge-backed piece of sandpaper, and I intentionally use a used one because it's less dull. Yes, the blue tape adjacent to the work area is to protect it. That was very intentional, and I'm glad you observed that, because I'm trying to focus on only the area that's within the blue lines that you can see, right? So from here, it's more the same. You're taking some of those more harsh sanding marks that you just made, and you're going to knock them back and smooth things out. And you can see that up close, get it to focus. You can sort of see, even though it's a little bit unfocused, that right here there's a low spot. So I need to add a little bit more spackle right there, and then come back and hit this again. So at this point, I'm going to set this aside. I don't want to work it anymore, because I know that I have more sanding to do, and I don't want to over sand in other areas. So again, I still have my glove on. I'm ready to go. Put on just a little bit more, a little more up there too, maybe a little low spot. All right, and then I've got my paper towel that I try to wipe off the excess. All right, so that's really it. As you can look into the corner, you can see where I've done that fill, and so everything is nice and smooth there. There's a nice transition, and that is essentially ready for primer. I'll do some final sanding and smoothing and check it all out and rotate everything. I like to actually look and inspect these in different lights, and what I mean by lights is like light orientation. So the way that light is coming down right now, I also have two spotlights coming this way. So it's kind of hard to tell in some of these transitions, but like little lips and edges will cast a slight shadow. So move the part around so that you are checking for any imperfections in that way, because you'll find that in some directions you'll say, oh, look at all of those flaws. Look at all of that sanding that I need to do. That's why light is important. When I designed the lighting in this shop, I specifically designed it for that purpose. I didn't want permanent lights in the distance. So if you'll notice, like my shop, I've got just little tiny lights here and there that illuminate things so that I don't trip and fall. I don't have a very well lit entire basement. I have a well lit shop. Because if I have light over there casting inward into the shop, I could miss something that I'm seeing or looking at from the light that is being cast down on top of me. So directionality of light does matter in that regard. So from there, once I have everything sanded smooth, I will take our deluxe materials, fine, super lightweight glass fiber laminated. This is 0.6 ounces per square yard, very lightweight fabric, and I will use the Easy Coat to apply this, and I will do a filler layer with the micro balloons because it'll be easy, it'll be quick, and then I can move on directly to prime. I want to prime this so that I have a nice chemical and mechanical bond before I apply paint. That way that paint will not chip up, which is the whole reason we're doing this in the first place, really, because all the paint was chipping up and flaking off of the plastic on the top. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
All right. Any other questions since I've been yammering?
I do not see any questions as of yet.
Okay. Another thing that you can use this technique for is repairs. There are sometimes you'll have a model that has fiberglass parts, like a cowl, for example. You can repair those cracks pretty easily, but it's important to know how to do it. Really what it involves is a lot of patience and, frankly, more work. When you have a cowl that cracks, it's really important to know that the way this stuff behaves, you can't just simply put glue on the crack that you see. What you have to do is you have to sand back all the paint so that you can see the fiberglass and see where the crack goes. Once you find where the crack ends, you need to drill that out with a hole, a round, clean, sharp hole. Then you can do a backing with more fiberglass to seal the hole, fill the hole with more of the red spackle, or even the micro balloons and epoxy. That'll work too. Sand it smooth, and ideally you want to try to flow more epoxy into that crack. However, that's really difficult to do. It's generally not thin enough to do that. A lot of people will just simply cut the crack and then they'll mend it. But in our case, we're dealing with such tight tolerances on a lot of these scale things that usually what is done is thin CA. Hold the part together, thin CA, let it run down in through the crack and the fibers, and let it cure out. And then from there, it's strong enough for more epoxy. You'll take like a lightweight cloth and apply some fiberglass epoxy and fiberglass, etc., on the inside, and that way on the outside you can use more spackle and get the crack nice and smooth on the outside. That way you have a nice finish. Repaint, reapply rivets or other details, and then move on from there. So it's a lot of work, can be done. I've done it myself. It's not fun, but it can be done. And that's part of the reason why, like, when you go to a shop and you have car repairs for fiberglass, that's why it's so expensive. You're not paying necessarily for the fiberglass and epoxy, you're paying for the labor, and skilled labor at that. Sure. To do all of this stuff. I'll just say that, like, we have really skilled tradesmen in this area, and you can go down a deep dark rabbit hole with just fiberglass and epoxy, but what I'm giving you is just enough of the basics to use this as a tool to not get yourself in trouble or other people, but you have enough to make good use of it and start playing with it and not be afraid of it. So like I said, just 2 layers of the fiberglass cloth around this. Just in summary, 2 layers of fiberglass went around the backside, and then I applied remaining epoxy mixed with the micro balloons into this area, as well as try to create this transition, this little fillet. And from there, let that cure out. I cut off the excess, and then I applied some of my spackling putty over here on my spackling putty. Once it was cured, I sanded everything back, found additional work that needed to do. So this is iterative. It didn't take me very long. It's just you have to do it and then allow it to dry and give it time. So there's a time investment, but you have to think almost a couple of steps ahead to know what you're getting into. All right. Any other questions?
Suitor family asked, is it okay if I share a couple of watch outs regarding epoxy? Absolutely.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, epoxy inherently can be pretty dangerous chemicals. I know that there are some people that can be pretty sensitive. I'm just going to yammer on some of the safety stuff that I have while Suitor family is typing. But some people can be pretty sensitive to epoxy. Some people can even develop a sensitive to epoxy. They make masks that you can use to, essentially ventilator masks that can neutralize that. They have carbon filters or diatomaceous earth. So there are things like that to help eliminate some of those fumes if you're close to that. Don't get it in your eyes. If it's in your eyes, flush it out ASAP, because the heat from your body temperature will help it cure faster. It can cause damage. Okay, it is a chemical after all. Okay, if it gets on your fingers, isopropyl alcohol immediately. Use that to remove that from your fingers. It's not necessarily going to burn or tingle, but it's not good for you. All right. And then in addition to that, the dust. When you sand this stuff, since I'm not doing a whole lot of work here tonight, I did not use a respirator, but I do have one right here. I have a basic cloth mask that I use when I'm doing some of this stuff. In addition to that, I have my full respirator out down with my painting stuff. That's where I last used it. It's got an N95 mask or filter on it. Actually, no, that's a P1. It's a P100 because it filters viruses, because it's left over from a previous job that had it custom fit to my face. It still fits relatively well, at least well enough for paint, and I had leftover filters. So yeah, some good PPE will go a long way if you use this pretty frequently. All right, Suitor family, what you got?
He said the more epoxy you mix, the faster it will cure. So only mix
true.
a little more than you think you'll reasonably be able to work with at one time. Secondly, correct. If you're going to thin, be sure, and he's typing. And I wanted to point out too, make sure you read the mix ratio. If you don't have those mix ratios correct, you're going to have some issues. He said, so if you're going to thin, be sure you use only denatured ethanol and only at a max of about 5%.
Yeah. So don't be using isopropyl alcohol, because what's the other ingredient in isopropyl alcohol? Water. You don't want water in your epoxy mix, okay?
Water and oil.
Exactly. It's not going to cure out. It's going to do really bad things.
Yep.
Yeah, and adding too much will kill the cure. So you're messing with chemical ratios of a reaction, and if you dilute that reaction out too much, the reaction won't happen. So thank you for that. Gotcha.
George is asking, when using 3/4 ounce cloth in Z-epoxy finishing resin to cover a sheeted plane, do you recommend thinning the Z-epoxy resin with alcohol?
If you're using finishing resin, no. Finishing resin is definitely thin enough to get into 3/4 ounce. If you feel like you aren't getting in there, what you really need to do is start working the epoxy into it. So use like an old credit card I've seen people use. I personally prefer to use cardstock. Again, paper. It's biodegradable. Toss in the garbage, feel a little bit less bad about myself rather than using plastic, right? And it's cheap, it's easily come by, and I use cardstock a lot for tracing a lot of different things. I've used fiberglass really easy and cardstock for like creating bomb bay doors. Go to my YouTube channel. I've got a really great coverage of when I did the Saab B17 bomb bay doors. Started life as just a tracing on the bottom of a built fuselage, laid out the glass over top of it, and then literally traced over top. And it just started with cardstock. So yeah, it can be a really useful tool. Moving on, next question.
Can epoxy resin and fiberglass be used on a foam wing?
Absolutely, absolutely. The vast majority of large model airplanes are foam core with a balsa skin or combination of balsa and fiberglass. So the fiberglass itself, again, you have to be careful, because if you get into those exothermic reactions, it can melt the foam. So that's why I say use epoxy. In addition to that, you have to also be careful with laminating epoxy or fiberglass onto foam, because if there's some sort of chemical reaction that happens later, or too much heat from the sun that happens later, you'll develop soft spots and bubbles under the fiberglass. So that's why a lot of people try to take the foam, skin it with like 1/16 inch balsa wood, and then fiberglass it, because you get less of that gassing effect because of the chemical differential. I've seen it happen. My poor buddy Carl, you're P40, my brother. Unfortunate, but we love it.
So Mitch asked, is it better to mix by weight than volume? Ryan Elliott also chimed in and says he mixes ratio in a digital gram scale. Great way to accurately mix.
Yeah, kitchen scale. Have one in your shop. This is an old one. I bought my wife a nice pretty new one so that I could have the old one. Definitely use grams. Reason that you use grams is because you have far more resolution. You go to mix up even an 1/8 ounce of epoxy, that's a lot. It's a lot of epoxy. So for context, what I mixed up here for each one of these was 2 grams. 1 gram of epoxy, 1 gram of hardener. That's it. Now it's also important to check the system that you're working with. I have Fiberglass. It's a company or brand of fiberglass where it's a 3-to-1. Mm-hmm. So you have to make sure that you check the ratio. But yeah, do math. What was the other part of that question?
Mitch had asked, is it better to mix by weight than volume?
Yeah, that relates to what the manufacturer recommends. Most of the time it's going to be by mass. Yeah.
Brian Paris is asking, would you go over the epoxy micro balloon mix again using finishing resin ratio? I've heard of this, but have not done it. Great show, thanks.
So, in my opinion, no, because I use primers. When you go over micro balloons, at least these micro balloons, I know they make micro balloons in different sizes, right? But on average, the micro balloons that you're going to get, like from Deluxe Model products, when you go to sand it and then you apply a primer over top of it, the primer is going to fill in any small voids. And then once you go to do like your brush sanding, so like if I'm going to have something that's like baby butt smooth, I will effectively sand the primer. I don't actually sand it. I take a paper towel and I rub it down, almost like it's a tack cloth, because there's overspray from the primer. And that just helps sand back all of that overspray. And if you get to one of those sections where the micro balloons are not filled necessarily all the way with the primer, just add a little bit more primer. It's a lot easier to deal with it that way than it is with epoxy, because you apply the epoxy, it's not going to be smooth or as smooth as what you've worked, right? You're not really adding any strength because the epoxy with the micro balloons inherently is not strong, because you're effectively filling the epoxy with voids. So that's my best advice.
I think you touched that answered the used finishing resin, but and he just chimed in again. I think he's asking, what is the mixture of epoxy and micro balloons? Like how much of each? And then he was asking, would you use finishing resin over it? So he's asking about ratio between epoxy and micro balloons.
Okay, that too. That's a TLAR. That looks about right. That's that acronym, TLAR. Like I said, when I mix up micro balloons, I go to the consistency of toothpaste. So it's going to be kind of thick, but it's still going to kind of flow, right? And that's with finishing resin. Now, if I'm using like 30-minute epoxy and micro balloons, that's going to have a totally different feel. It's going to be kind of goopy. So really, it depends on the epoxy that you're working with. But with finishing epoxy, I'm definitely targeting toothpaste consistency, because you're only working with a little bit at a time, right? So you can't necessarily do this by, like, this weighs nothing. You can't do this by weight. So again, TLAR, and the more micro balloons that you add effectively, the easier it will be to sand later.
Okay.
Because again, you're trading off epoxy for empty space effectively.
Gotcha. So can you put too many micro balloons in then?
Oh, sure. You can go to the point where it's so dry that you can't use it. So when you're going to do it for the first time, add some, see how it feels, keep adding, see how it feels, keep adding, see how it feels. You'll get experience with it, and I still make mistakes, and I'm just like, I added too much. It happens.
Brian, if you need any more clarification on that, please drop any other questions in the chat.
I'm sorry I misunderstood your question.
No, I knew where you were going, but I was like, I think he wanted the first part of that first, so I think it made sense.
Yeah.
Rick said SIG used to have a finishing resin epoxy that used only a few drops of hardener. Does anyone have a product like this that you're aware of?
That's going to be more along the lines of a polyester resin.
Okay.
So the hardener is more of a catalyst. So it's gonna be like a liquid in a tube. So like, for example, Bondo has a brand of their epoxy that you can get, I know, at Home Depot. I've seen it. That's where I got this. And the hardener for it is just like, you get like a half-gallon tub of it, and the hardener is like this little tiny tube. And I'm telling you now, don't go to polyesters if you absolutely can avoid it. It's not a matter of preference; it's a matter of workability. It's much more difficult. Like if you were doing molds, if you're making molds of an entire fuselage, sure, go at it, because that's going to be a much more robust and longer lasting fiberglass for making a mold, like to cast a new product off of it. But if you're just making repairs or covering a wing or something, I would really stick to epoxy only.
Makes sense. Perfect. Yeah, Brian said you had covered everything he was looking for.
Okay.
We could wrap this up with a question.
Okay. Right. The hard question. All right. This is a highly debated topic, but I was able to actually speak to an aircraft mechanic. Okay. According to investigations, what was really the cause of a series of stall spins when the Texan was debuted? So what was actually the cause of a series of stall spins when the Texan was debuted? So to back up a little bit, a lot of people believe that the Texan is a very misbehaved airplane. It's really not. The issue arose from when there were a series of accidents where pilots thought that at low speeds it would just completely stall out and it would spin into the ground. So this wasn't actually a problem. There was a problem with the airplane. So what was that problem?
And I think we'll give a hardware kit away for this one, since it's a hard one.
Yeah. This one's not very well known. We usually hear the pilot accounts. We don't necessarily hear the mechanic accounts of what goes on with these airplanes.
Brian Angeris said placement of the wings.
No.
Lack of low
laminar flow.
Laminar
No.
flow.
I mean, it is technically related to flow, but it has more to do with flaps. Because remember, on this model of airplane, there are 3 wing segments. There's the middle straight section, and then the outer wing panels give you your dihedral. And so the flaps themselves, you have a center section and 2 outer sections. The roll bar obstructing the view? No, that was an inconvenience. Issue with the flaps. You're on the right track. Can you name what it is? You're the closest so far, Pete. I know, right?
Boundary layer.
No, it's not related to the boundary layer.
You guys can thank Joshua. He comes up with the toughest questions.
Blanked out airflow on the tail? No.
The outer flaps acted like the ailerons.
Oh, yeah, I mean, no, that's not it. Flaps too heavy. No. All right, well, I think we'll give it to Pete. He's the closest. It's not washout or wash in. So what happens is that the flaps are
hinge location. Pete.
No. It's so there's a torque bar. There's a torque bar that lowers and raises these flaps. And there are pins that connect the torque bar to the flaps. What would happen is the vibration and torque would actually let those pins come out. And so you had a situation where you would have flap differential. So the connection was made, so you had control of the flaps on the middle flap, but you had these torque tubes that connected the middle flap to the outer flaps. So you would have pins fail, and one flap would work and the other flap wouldn't. You would have flap differential, and there was not enough aileron authority to overcome that differential.
Huh.
So from there, you would have, they issued, what was it? I have notes on this. I have notes. A tech order was issued to place just a standard rubber hose over those joints to help reduce the vibration, but also keep the pins in place.
Interesting.
And they never had an issue after that, ever.
Huh.
So
if
this
you got a
airplane is
Texan,
very well behaved.
if you got a Texan, go get some garden hose, cut off a piece, slide it over there. That's interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
That was a good one. Pete, shoot us an email, orders@dubro.com. Let me know if you want a 256, a 440, 632, 2mm, or 3mm hardware accessory kit. We'll get that sent out to you.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right, my man. Good show. Everybody liked the epoxy topic. So,
like I said, some people feel like it's a difficult to approach topic, but it's really not. You just kind of have to dig in, and there are some little things along the way that you really got to watch out for. It's kind of messy. Be ready to clean up and have fun.
yeah. Yeah, don't be intimidated. It's not as hard as it seems.
Nah.
The first one may be a little rough, but you'll get through it.
Yeah. I mean, nobody's first the first time they do, or nobody's great the first time that they do stuff like this. Just be aware that anything that you do can be fixed.
Yeah. Little elbow grease and a hand sander, and you'll get through it.
Exactly.
Good stuff. Let's see. Got one comment. Switch comments. What's going on here? There we go.
I don't know.
Great show. Thumbs up. Another great show. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Next show, I'm not at the office. I don't have my marker board. Is it the 10th?
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
2 weeks. 2 weeks from today. So, yes, it is the 10th. February 10th will be the next show, and then February 24th after that. So if you guys aren't subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do so. That way you get notifications. They go up on the Facebook page as well. You could subscribe to the newsletter. We send an email blast out the night of as well. So that way you guys can stay in the loop and catch the next show. Joshua, as always, thank you for your knowledge and your tough questions.
You got it. I got one for next time. It'll be fun.
Be ready. Have Google in the queue, boys.
It's another mechanics question. Yeah.
Love it. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And as always, have a good night. Enjoy the building. And hopefully you get some warm weather soon so you can get out and fly. Or if you got snow, Dubro snow skis. Just saying.
Yeah, man.
Have a good night, everybody.